ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Harmon Museum Lunch and Learn. I'm John Zimkus, the Education Director and Historian here. A little commercial as to what's going on. First off, there was the unveiling of the statue of Dr. Joseph Ward, Major General during the Revolutionary War, died in the Battle of Bunker Hill, namesake of our county of Warren County. It was unveiled, it's in front, so it's a beautiful statue. You should take a look at it. So when you leave today, you just go down the little garden walk over here and go in front of the museum facing Broadway, and you will see it. It is absolutely fantastic. A little bit of trivia. There are only 14 states which have a Warren County. Warren County, Ohio is the largest, and despite the fact that some 6 of the original 13 colonies had a Warren County, we were actually ahead of at least 2 of them at being formed in 1805. It's a beautiful statue. Please take a look at it. History Camp is coming to Warren County's Historical Society's Harmon Museum. Once again, I am the director of that camp. We'll be talking about how do you get there from here? Transportation over the year. And we're going to take a field trip to Carillon Park and take part of the special program there. We're going to talk about a pilot, talk about aviation, the various things about that, and explore many of the things which you have in the Harmon Museum in regards to transportation. It's $55 for, by the way, it's open to those entering to those entering 7th grade. It's $55 to families who are members of the Historical Society, $75. It's a 4-day camp. It's still a pretty good bargain. So it's going to be July 7th through the 9th, Monday through Thursday. Normally about 3 hours. On field trip day, it'll be slightly longer, but it's definitely worthwhile. The Beetle Cabin next door, we are open on the 5th of July, the first Saturday of July, and it's free, and we're going to be making Gordon-Goes. So if you have a young person who's interested in that sort of pioneer entertainment and pleasure, please have them come 11 to 1 on July 5th. Please remember that the museum will be closed for inventory and repairs and a whole bunch of other exciting things the first week of August. So we may not be open, but we will, believe us, we'll make this. As far as lunch and learns go, next month on the 19th, we will have Crossing the Pond. Mr. Ashley Ford, the Ashley and Barbara Ford Maritime Exhibit is open on the main floor of the Harvey. Mr. Ford is a retired executive from Procter & Gamble, and he will be, and he has donated to us for our collection these fantastic models of steamships, some going back 100 years or even more. And they're all on display in a brand new exhibit we have created. He'll be talking about his collection and how we got into it and some of the various fascinating facts about them. And that will be on July 16th. On August 20th, our speaker will be Steve Osborne. Steve Osborne has recently, based from Cincinnati, recently wrote a book, and his topic will be genealogy, genetics, and the quiet crisis of misattributed parenting. He will find out how we found out that his father is not really his father, and how all that came to be. And he's written a book about it, and I've heard it's really quite fascinating. September 21st, Caroline Scott Harrison, First Lady of the United States, for Benjamin Harrison, born in Ohio, educated at Miami University. She will be our guest. She is the First Lady of the United States at one time, and also the first president of the DAO. She's brought to us by Joyce Loving Browning. For those of you who have been coming to Lunch and Learns for a number of years may know Joyce. She has been with us, and she has been responsible for bringing Annie Oakley of Morningfield, Washington, a Cincinnati grave robber, Lottie Moon, a Confederate spy who lived in Oxford, Ohio, and various other people, which she will help us on this particular September 21st. And October 15th, our good friend Linda Morton will bring some more of her fantastic collection. It's what's got us started. It must have been, 5 years ago, I think, wasn't it, Linda? 5 years ago, she started with over 100 years of Halloween collectibles. And we're bringing that back. We have seen her Valentine, we've seen her Christmas, we've seen her Easter, but now we're going back to the motherlode. The 100 years of Halloween collectibles. So these are some of the neat things happening at the museum. Please visit our gift shop. There is a discount. I believe it's 20% on items except consignment items. Those are only 10%. But take a look at those. That discount is strictly because you are with us today. So we're going to go and enjoy our lunch, and in about 15, 20 minutes, we will have our speaker, who will happen to be me.
Yeah.
I'll see you in a little bit.
Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for coming to Lunch and Learn today. It's my privilege to introduce our speaker. One of the things that I found out a long time ago was that to survive in the Harmon Museum, one has to be interdisciplinary in nature. You have to be willing and able to move from one thing to the next without dropping a hat, but being confident in what you're doing. And just in the last, I would say 2 weeks, the fellow I'm about to introduce has been doing sitting tours. He's been doing the city show. He researched with Dr. Gary Meisner the history of Harmon Park. He's been working on this lecture tonight, or this afternoon, on the Underground Railroad. And, of course, he was telling pioneer stories in the Beetle Cabin during the Lebanon Festival of the Arts. So I think he fits more than the bill of an interdisciplinary scholar. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce our historian and your speaker today, Mr. John Zimkus.
Thank you very much, Mike. I appreciate that. I will let you know I do plan on taking a nap this afternoon. The Underground Railroad was one of the most intriguing stories in the pre-Civil War era in America. It's a loose national network of freed blacks, former slaves, Quakers, Wesleyan, Methodists, Presbyterians, and other abolitionists. It is a story, or perhaps more correctly, thousands of stories, where people are helping those who are enslaved to come to freedom. And it also was illegal. This map does show you the various routes of the Underground Railroad. You'll notice that the one going through Ohio is by far the thickest. And that is because Ohio did have more enslaved people go through there to try and find freedom than any other area. Being neighbors of two slave states, Kentucky and Virginia, this is because West Virginia did not begin until the middle of the Civil War. But there are also, you may notice, arrows going in other directions. They're going to Cuba, they're going to Hispaniola, where Haiti is, they're going to Mexico. A lot of people may not realize that one of the reasons why the Texicans were fighting for independence at the Alamo is they wanted slaves. And the Mexican government did not want those slaves. This came from a book by Wilbur H. Siebert. It was written in 1898. It too shows the various routes going through Ohio. Now there is, the name Underground Railroad is, in some ways it's unfortunate. First off, no one is quite sure how it got the name, although the most accepted origin of the name is that in the early 19th century, near Ripley, Ohio, a slave named Tice Davids had escaped across the Ohio River. His master came looking for him, and he could not find him. And he's in Ripley, and he is supposedly to have said, it's as if he had disappeared in some sort of underground road. Now, he didn't say railroad. And one reason why he didn't say railroad is at the time, Ohio didn't have the railroad. It was out east. It was, of course, in England and various places in Europe. By the mid-1840s, we did get the railroad with the Little Miami Railway going through Warren County. But the story was repeated over and over again until the new fashion of travel, the railroad, got its name into the title, as if he had disappeared in an underground railroad. Now, this came from another Wilbur Siebert's book. Siebert, I'll talk about him a little bit more, wrote 2 books on the Underground Railroad. The first one was in 1898, and the second one was 53 years later, in 1951. Now, this does show in his second book the various routes and trails. Warren County is right here. There is quite a few lines going through here. Of course, Cincinnati, with its great river traffic, had an awful lot of enslaved people there, either loading or unloading material. Siebert was actually born, and he was born in Columbus. His parents were German immigrants. He became a professor at Ohio State University, and he taught history there from 1893 to 1935. During his lifetime, he was considered the premier expert on the Underground Railroad. Fascinating individual, and a lot what you know about the Underground Railroad is coming from his notes and his research. Now, we do a disservice to the Underground Railroad by actually calling it the Underground Railroad. It makes it sound like it's an organization. And Levi Coffin, as you may have heard in history class or in your reading, was the president of the Underground Railroad. And this person was a station master, and this person was a conductor, and all these various other titles. It makes it sound like it's one big corporate organization. And that's exactly what it was not. It was a hodgepodge of individuals. And because it was this hodgepodge, there is practically nothing you could say that applied to all parts of the Underground Railroad. So, for the Underground Railroad, they put a light in the top window, or they kept a quilt outside. Well, that may have been true for some places, but it wasn't universally true. Because you may not know that your neighbor's part of the Underground Railroad too. Maybe your connection is that my brother and I are both members. Or maybe it's a religious connection. Quakers were very much against slavery. And Warren County was famous for its early Quaker settlements in the northern part of the county. So it might be familiar, it might be religious, it might just be people of conscience who thought that this was wrong. Now, after the Civil War, it became quite popular for people to say, well, my house was part of the Underground Railroad. My grandfather did this or did that or what have you. You don't necessarily need a secret tunnel. You don't necessarily need a hidden room or anything of that nature.
The most documented cases usually concern people who simply hid them in the attic or in the basement or in the barn. And a lot of what we believe to be part of the Underground Railroad is based on circumstantial evidence. Well, they were Quaker, that's in their favor. They knew somebody who was part of the Underground Railroad, a documented person. Or maybe there was this tunnel, or maybe there was this little closet kind of thing which had no connection. And so it became quite popular for white citizens to claim part of the Underground Railroad, and part of that was exaggerated. At the same time, African American involvement has been overlooked. To have an escaped slave trust a white person took a great deal of gumption. There was really no reason why they should, because their exposure to a Euro-American citizen, for the most part, hasn't been a good one. So why should they believe this person will take them to freedom? And then on the reverse side of that, if you were an African American, you could perhaps find yourself back in slavery if you were helping someone to escape their bondage. Enslaved individuals often found their freedom in what is now Ohio before there was an even United States. Many of these, they were often adopted by various indigenous tribes, Native Americans. This is a couple actors performing about 10, 15 years ago near Yellow Springs. And the gentleman on the left is supposed to be the legendary Caesar. Now, what we know of Caesar is, as I mentioned, quite legendary. We don't know what is myth. We do know a few things. The Ohio Department of Natural Resources, of course, there is a Caesars Creek State Park, which is named after Caesars Creek. According to the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, the place was called Caesars as early as 1780, and it wasn't given that name, according to them, by any Euro-American settler. It was called that before the settlers actually got there. It was called that because a black man was adopted by the Shawnee, and he loved fishing on that creek. So that is a fact. Another fact is when the Shawnees eventually moved to Oklahoma Territory, many of the descendants of this Caesar were part of that group. There is the various stories. We do know that he did get married. We do know that he had a wife, Sally Kishpoko, I think was her name. They had various children. But, he was a contemporary of Tecumseh, although he was a little older than Tecumseh, and he was a contemporary of Blue Jacket. Now, in 1797, by the way, according to one story, Caesar was going down the Ohio River with his master on a flatboat around 1774, just before the American Revolution. They were attacked and all the white settlers were killed, but Caesar was taken into the community of the Shawnees and made a family member. Beer's History of Warren County, which was written in 1882, does quote a man named Francis Bailey. When Samuel Highway, in March of 1797, was following Harmer's trace to where he had bought land and would be the foundation of what is now Waynesville. Harmer's trace is this green line right over here. In 1790, General Josiah Harmer took 1,400 men, and he also took dozens and dozens of cattle. And he had a party in front going down to chop down the trees. They were going to make a path through the area. They did come through what is now Lebanon. They did stop somewhere near where it is now Harmon Park, a quarter of a mile, a third of a mile from where we are now. And they did, this little bit right over here is in fact Caesar's Creek entering right there. Oop, wrong way. But Highway was following them, and with him was an Englishman. Highway was English himself, but with him was a 23-year-old Francis Bailey, who would later go back to England and become a famous astronomer. And one of the most famous observations was an eclipse of the sun. And so he became quite famous in the Royal Astronomical Society, one of its founding fathers. Bailey writes in his diary, "We were proceeding it on at this rate and observed in some distance before us a human being dart into the woods and endeavored to flee from us. Ignorant of what this might mean, we delayed the wagons, and some of us went into the woods and tracked the footsteps of a man some little distance, when suddenly a Negro made his appearance from behind some bushes and hastily inquired whether there were any Indians in our party or whether we had seen any. The hideousness of the man's countenance, which was painted with large red dots or on a black background, and his sudden appearance startled us at first. He then began to inform us that he had been a prisoner among the Indians. He said that he had treated him as one of their own children and doing everything in their power to render his situation comfortable. They had given him a wife and a mother and plenty of land to cultivate if he chose to, and the liberty of doing everything but making his escape. He asked us what course the nearest town lay from us, and after telling him, he said that the Indians no doubt had been pursuing him ever since they had missed him, and that he intended to escape to the first town for protection. He said he could not give up the idea of never seeing again those friends and relatives whom he left in his early days. Now, we don't know how long he was with them, but let's say early days. So he could have been there for quite a while. And at that time, Deerfield did exist, South Lebanon, and of course, Cincinnati was a major town. Bailey went on to say, this man, when he was taken prisoner, was a slave to a person in Kentucky. And though amongst the Indians he enjoyed liberty and all the comforts which can be expected in the state of nature, and which were more, I may safely pronounce, than when he tasted the bitter cup of slavery, yet was this man, who so lately enjoyed the blessings of heaven, going to render up voluntarily slave to his former master for what? That he may once again embrace his friends and relatives for whom he had been so long separated. We could but look upon the man with an eyes of pity and compassion, after giving him something to pursue his journey with and desiring him to follow our tracks to Columbia. We separated. Columbia was one of the first settlements on the Ohio River in the Sims or Miami Purchase. Columbia Road took you to where Columbia was. And if you get closer to Columbia, which was where Lunken Airport is, it was called Lebanon Road, going back and forth. In another similar incident, Beer's History of Warren County, written in 1882, says that the first civilized person buried in Washington Township, where Fort Ancient is, was a runaway slave from Kentucky who was found sick in the forest by William Smalley. Smalley was a local frontiersman, sort of, in a sense, sort of a Daniel Boone character for Warren County. Cared for him, but he did pass away, and buried him in the banks of Todd's Forks near Smalley's house at the fork of Bullskin and College Township roads. This was a short time after Smalley settled, perhaps in 1803 or 1804. family connections were quite big. Now, the Butterworth family, its connection was not only family-wise, but also was religious. The patriarch of the Butterworth family was Benjamin Butterworth, living in Virginia. Hundreds, if not more, of Quakers did leave the South as slavery became more and more popular. And they left the South to come up this way. Benjamin Butterworth came up with his 13 children and a wife. One of his children was, in fact, Thomas Butterworth, pictured here in one of Siebert's books, and that is his wife, Nancy. Her maiden name is Wales. She is a distant cousin of Levi Coffin, the president of the Underground Railroad. Thomas married Nancy in a double wedding at the Hicksite Meeting House in Waynesville. Nancy's sister, Jane Wales, married Valentine Nicholson. And so their connection in the Underground Railroad, the Nicholsons lived in Harveysburg. The Thomas Butterworth and family lived near Maineville, near the Ohio River at Foster's Crossing. Let's see. It became known as Butterworth Station, and that actually had a dual meaning. When the Little Miami Railway was being built, the Butterworths gave land and also provided material for the railroad being built there. And in payment, they were given a stop on the railroad. So at certain times, if they would flag the train down near where the river is on the bike trail today, it would stop. But it also was part of the Underground Railroad. Thomas and his wife Nancy were very, very prominent in that. Thomas's brother William was prominent in that, as was his other brother Clarkson. The Siebert, and one of the things we know about the Butterworths is after the Civil War, they talked about their involvement. Now that is probably the only key things you will have as to, yes, we know they're part of the Underground Railroad because they told us they were. And so we're talking 10 years or a tad more after the Civil War, many people did start talking about their involvement, and the Butterworths were one of them. There were various stories. Some of them were actually told by Thomas and Nancy's daughter, Jane, a little girl at the time. And she often, she's named after her aunt, Jane Nicholson. One story is that they were taking a load of hay going north to Lebanon on what was then Deerfield Pike. Deerfield Road, by the way, once went all the way from Dayton to South Lebanon, the original, Deerfield being its original name. So although we have little parts of Deerfield Road in Lebanon, and if you go south of Deerfield, you'll find other Deerfield roads going north, because it was the first settlement in what is a Euro-American settlement in what is now Warren County. But it was a toll road, and young Jane remembers clutching a penny in her hand. And as they approached the toll, she was nervous and gave the toll keeper the penny, knowing full well that hidden in the hay were several fugitive enslaved people. There was another time she recalled her mother calling her to her and opening their basement door and pointing down to the basement. And according to the family accounts, there were 26 enslaved people asleep in the basement. And the mother went like this. Of course, when I talked about to my young students who come through here, There are two possible meanings with that. One, of course, is we don't want to wake them, and the other one is it's a secret. We don't tell anybody about what you see here. There was another time young Jane was totally confused that her mother was openly friendly to a slave catcher. An important thing to know is that slavery was illegal in Ohio, but slave catchers weren't. So she is feeding the slave catcher, giving him extra pieces of pie and what have you, and her young Jane couldn't figure out why. Well, it turns out that there were some fugitive slaves in the barn, and another family member was leading them into the woods while this guy was enjoying the meal. In 1935, Thomas's brother, William's land, 160 acres of it, was sold to the Girl Scouts of America, and it became Camp Butterworth, probably one of the closest Girl Scout camps to us. Two buildings at Camp Butterworth, I don't know if they're still there or not, but they do have connections to the Underground Railroad. One was a Victorian-style two-story building built in 1905, which was called Freedom Lodge. And the other one is Quaker Ridge, a group of 5 small cabins put together. Now, as I mentioned, the slavery was not allowed in the state of Ohio. The Northwest Ordinance of 1787, which was an ordinance as how the government in the Northwest Territory, the land northwest of the Ohio River, east of the Mississippi, and south of the Great Lakes, was going to be organized into future states. And one of the things it did say is that slavery was not going to be allowed. Now, much of the Northwest Ordinance did become the model for the U.S. Constitution, although the members of the Continental Convention were not brave enough to outlaw slavery because of the financial need for it from citizens from the South. A couple of years later, in 1793, the Fugitive Slave Act was passed. Part of the Constitution, it guaranteed slave owners the right to take back escaped slaves. Then in 1850, the Fugitive Slave Law was passed, and this had a devastating effect on many members of the Underground Railroad. This law made it the duty of every law enforcement official to arrest anybody who might be involved in aiding a runaway slave, and made it a crime for anyone to help an escaped slave with food or shelter. Some people referred to it as the Bloodhound Law. Prior to this, a slave had to go to court and you had to prove he was your slave. After this law, that was no longer, a slave could no longer ask for a jury trial. And if you were found guilty of aiding a slave, you could be imprisoned for 6 months and fined as much as $1,000. This is from Siebert's first book, The Underground Road from Slavery to Freedom, and it does show a very bad map of Warren County, which is right over here, and this is Clinton County and Greene County. Near Foster's, you do have Thomas Butterworth and William Butterworth, William being the one whose land eventually became Camp Butterworth. In Harveysburg, you have Valentine Nicholson Station. In Springboro, spelled here O-U-G-H, you have several family members, including a J. Janney, who is a distant relative of Allison Janney, the famous TV and movie star. And you also have Clinton County and Oakland. That will be important later on. The major routes were the Quakers lived in northern Warren County. You had Springboro, Waynesville, and Harveysburg. Each settlement had, the majority of its population at this time is Quaker. The Butterworths are Quaker, but not living anywhere near a meeting house. There were secondary routes going through Lebanon. And the route that young Jane, where she gave the penny to go through the toll road, probably was this one route here, right here. Jane Finley Wales Nicholson, like her relatives of the Butterworth, she's the one who married Valentine Nicholson and the double wedding that Nancy Wales married Thomas Butterworth. She too wrote of her experience. They appeared in the Western Star newspaper in 1885, a series of 4 articles, and their titles were Memories of Long Ago, Scenes and Incidents of Life of an Octogenarian Portrayed with a Pleasant Pen. And the writer was J.F.N., Jane Finley Nicholson. But much of those writings were about her involvement in the Underground Railroad. She does say at one point, about this time there were many slaves fleeing from the masters and from bloodhounds on their tracks. On the way to Canada, they required shelter, food, clothing, and transportation. In this capacity, I worked for 20 years until all were free by the Emancipation Proclamation. Hundreds that passed through stopped at my home, ate at my table. I heard their tales of hardships, their desire for freedom, and the danger and sacrifice they were making to obtain it. Many had left near and dear relatives behind. Some mothers left babes in the cradle. In the records of 1 year, the number that came was 86, but in their years, I know we had many more. One of the things she wrote about concerns the free school in Harveysburg. She wrote that the first children to be taught in this free black school were actually the children of a plantation owner in North Carolina. They were his children from his relationship with a slave. And apparently he loved these children and he wanted them to have an education, which was quite illegal in North Carolina. So he sent an agent up first to check out this school. And then eventually he brought his children here. He came up, according to Jane once. The father and former master came north to see how his children were doing. Their teacher told me, Elizabeth Harvey told Jane Finley Wales Nicholson, she had many long talks with him. He said that these bright yellow young children, that they would be outlawed by both black and white, that their social condition would be truly a sad one. Quote, and whom have I to blame for this? He said, whom but myself? Seeing this thus moved, she ventured further to ask him, would he someday liberate his slaves? And he promised he would do so. While he was up here once, he heard that in Oakland, in Clinton County, there was going to be a large New England Anti-Slavery Society meeting. And he decided to see it. Mrs. Harvey and Dr. Harvey both told him, we don't think that's a good idea. These people were die-hard anti-slavery. And they weren't the moderates like he's dealing with in Harveysburg. And he said to them after going there, "They are so furious they might stab me in the back, and I will sell my life as dearly as possible." He was so frustrated by meeting them that he decided to rip up all the papers he had about freeing his slaves. So we have in this 1875 map, we've got we've got Butterworth Station over here, Lebanon here, Springboro right there, Waynesville and Harveysburg, and we have the Shakers of Union Village. 4,000 acres, which were Shakers, not to be confused with Quakers, although the name Shaker does sort of have a Quaker origin. They were a separatist utopian society. Jesus never married, so they shouldn't marry. There was equality. There was a male and female spirit of God. God was in their founder, Ann Lee. So their first founder is a woman. She is succeeded by another woman. They broke up into groups which they called families. Father and mother were the leaders. They were celibate, but they took in converts. They set up orphanages and hoped that the young people, when they turned 21, would remain. So they were, in many ways, progressive. The first Shaker convert, by the way, the reason they came up here is the Shakers used to get so excited in their religious experience, they would get what some people called the jerks. They would shake, physically get moved. In 1801 and 1802, there was the Great Kentucky Revival. Presbyterian and Baptist ministers speaking fire and brimstone, people getting the jerks and shaking. The Shakers, who were living in the Albany, New York area, heard of this, and 3 missionaries walked over 1,000 miles, first going through the Cumberland Gap, initially found no converts in Kentucky, but then went up to Ohio, where Minister Richard McNamara, who was one of the ministers in the revival in Kentucky, he was the minister of what was once the Turtle Creek Presbyterian Church. And it was near where 741 meets 63, about 3 or 4 miles from where we are now. They then broke away and became part of what was known as the New Lives. Their first convert in the West, which Ohio was the West, was in March, a man named Malcolm Worley. On March 29th, their second convert was a 19-year-old freed African-American young woman named Anna Middleton. Anna would be part of the Shaker community at Union Village for 55 years. She is recorded in Shaker history as being an honest-minded and kind-hearted colored woman. She died just a day or two before the attack on Fort Sumter, starting the American Revolution. There were African-American Shakers. So this is an old engraving, and you can see some of them are African-American in the back. There was maybe anywhere from a half dozen to a dozen at Union Village at one time. Job Mullen was a known member of the Underground Railroad. He was from Springboro. In 1895, he is 89 years old. He dictates a letter to Dr. Siebert at Ohio State. And he says in the letter, "I can give but 3 names of Underground Railroad stations: Shaker Village, Waynesville, and Springboro." Now that does give us credence that the Shakers of Union Village were part of the Underground Railroad. It also tells us that you often don't know how many people are involved in the Underground Railroad. Here is a man who is documented as being a member of that, yet he knows, perhaps he lives in Springboro, so he knows who is before him, he knows who is after him, but he doesn't know much beyond that. Ichabod Corwin, one of the four founders of Lebanon. The monument in front of Berry Intermediate School does commemorate him being the first settler in the what is now Lebanon, March of 1796. His youngest son, a lawyer, Robert Griffin Corwin, writing to Dr. Siebert, says, "My first recollection, which was at the age of 5, was the business of the Underground Railroad dates back to 1820, when I remember seeing fugitives in my father's house, though I dare say it had been going on long before that time." Now, Ichabod was a Baptist, so you don't necessarily have to be a Quaker. This is an 1875 map of Lebanon. The Corwin property was right here. That's where Berry is today. There was an African-American man named Thomas Benford. He was born in Virginia in 1817, came to Lebanon prior to 1850s. He had a barber shop on East Mulberry Street. So his barber shop was over here someplace. He lived on Pleasant Street. Francis Dunleavy's step-grandson, a man by the name Judson Morris, in 1907, wrote a letter to the Western Star newspaper, and he said that he mentions that Thomas Bedford, as a young man, was part of the Underground Railroad, as was Dunleavy himself. Morris said that Benford used Dunleavy's horses to aid fugitive slaves obtain freedom in Canada. Of course, the reason for going to Canada is slave catchers are not allowed in Canada. So that is illegal. Benford did die in 1886. Now, Dunleavy, of course, we know him as, those who have been here for a long time, as the first teacher in all of the Miami Valley, let alone Lebanon and Warren County. But in 1797, he had a school, about a half a mile to the west of where we are. But he always believed in the equality of the races. And he often admitted that he may have lost, after being a teacher, he was elected judge, and he was a judge for 14 years. But many a times he was not given positions because of his feelings about slavery, but he was well documented. Now also, in the area, there was another story. Siebert, and the only time I've ever heard about this person, Amy Clark, is in Siebert's book. And he does say, Miss Amy Clark, a mulatto slave, was helped from a steamboat in Cincinnati Landing in 1832 and given employment on College Hill. She soon married Joseph Barber, an underground conductor, who drove with his loads of passengers 35 miles northeast to Lebanon, Ohio, in Warren County. Amy assisted in caring for and forwarding these people until 1837, when the couple went on for a long drive to Windsor, Canada. So eventually they decided to take advantage of the slave catchers not being in Canada themselves. Springboro's extensive research on the Underground Railroad does include Napoleon Johnson and his wife, Celia, known station masters in the Springboro area. They lived on East Mill Street over here. He too was originally from Virginia and was said to be part of that. There's a number of houses, some over 2 dozen, including Jonathan Wright's, and the vast majority of them are, going back to our initial problems, circumstantial evidence. They are Quaker. They were anti-slavery, and because of this hidden thing here or this one note there, we do think they were part of the Underground Railroad. Springboro Historical Society has published an excellent booklet, 27 Stations to Libertyville, all about the involvement in the Underground Railroad. Waynesville, too, also had involvement in the Underground Railroad. The Miami House Inn on the corner of Main and North Street was said to be part of that, as was the Seth Silver Haynes house on South 3rd Street. Was the Golden Lamb part of the Underground Railroad? Well, I've been asked that several times. One of my many part-time jobs is I'm the historian of the Golden Lamb, and I'll be there tonight between 6 and 8 talking to people at their tables. Well, we've got circumstantial evidence on both sides of the question here. By the way, this is the oldest known likeness of the Golden Lamb. It's 1846. It was drawn by Henry Howe, who in 1846 and in 1888 wrote 2 versions of a 2-volume history of Ohio. And so we are the Lebanon House at this time. This would be Broadway. In 1844, they added the 3rd floor on the Golden Lamb. This must be the attic, which would be part of the 4th floor. If you look at the Golden Lamb from the south looking north, you will see that these 2 windows are there. There is no window right here. So when they added the 4th floor, they apparently took what was part of the attic and just extended it to be part of it. So they kept that part of the building. There's no window here, but there's a 4th floor and it goes that way. But anyway, April 1843, a man named Isaac Stubbs buys the Golden Lamb. Now, Stubbs Mill is actually named after his brother, Zimri Stubbs. The Stubbs family are another very large family of Quakers who moved north from North Carolina and Georgia to go to where there is no slavery. He is part of that movement. It is said in the Warren County Atlas of 1875 that Stubbs, quote, his religious connection was that of the Society of Friends, Quaker, in which faith he reared his family and has particularly strict in the moral training of his children. That moral training very well could be that slavery is wrong. He has a documented first cousin by the name of Henry Stubbs, who lived in southern Preble County in a small community called West Elkton. And Henry was involved in the Underground Railroad, as was his children. Their documentation of that is quite strong. In 2007, when they were remodeling part of the Golden Lamb, and by the way, an 1854 addition to the Golden Lamb was made in 1854. So it extended, almost doubling the size of the Golden Lamb. So it stopped where the shaker room is. And so it expands, and if you look at the Golden Lamb, you will see there's a mortar seam on the 3rd floor. And there's an extra 2 feet between windows because one side is the 44 3rd floor and the other side is the 54 3rd floor. So, but in the first building, Stubbs still owns the building, they were remodeling and they found a 3 by 4 foot trap door which locked from the inside, not from on top, but from below. Why was it there? People like to speculate. Well, it must have been part of the Underground Railroad. The routes coming through Lebanon do come Lebanon and then head off to where West Elkton was. So there was possibly a route there. So that is some of the reasons why it might be part of the Underground Railroad. Now, here's some reasons why it may not be. Isaac Stubbs was a pure businessman. He was in business, he was buying and selling, and he never physically ran the Golden Lamp. He went through a string of innkeepers. So if he's going through innkeepers, they have to be knowledgeable of the Underground Railroad too. They have to be part of it. And there was more than one innkeeper during this time period. So the more people who know about it, the more danger it becomes for anyone involved. The Western Star pointed out that the Golden Lamb was for sale several times by Stubbs. And it also and then that same atlas, we talked about him being very religious, talked about he observed a marketed economy in expenditure of money, and by close application and frugality accumulated a large property. He gave his whole attention to his business, so they say. Now, another problem may be, the Fugitive Slave Law of 1850. That edition was built in 1854. Many, many people backed off from the Butterworths backed off. They stopped being involved once the Fugitive Slave Law of 1850 was enacted. So there is just as many reasons why it could not be part of the Underground Railroad. The stiff penalties imposed by the Fugitive Slave Law of 1850, as I just mentioned, did stop a lot of people of being involved in it. You could be in prison for a year. You could be fined $1,000. Now, people like Harriet Tubman were not afraid of that sort of thing. Her devotion to the cause was tremendous, and there were other people like her. The most famous painting about the Underground Railroad was painted by a man named Charles T. Webb. He was born in New York, came to Ohio in 1844 in Springfield, and then settled in Cincinnati and eventually Covington. This painting was done in 1893. It is often referred to as the Underground Road, but also has the name Fugitive Arriving at Levi Coffin's Indiana Farm, a busy station in the Underground Railroad. We don't know, even today, as much as we would like about the Underground Railroad. Some people have not been forthcoming with the information they have. As I've mentioned lots of times, it's speculation, circumstantial evidence. Many a fugitive slave promised that when they made it to Canada, to freedom, they would not tell who helped them. And the vast majority of them kept that word and never did. And that's one reason why we don't know as much about the Underground Railroad as we would like. Thank you. Okay. Anybody have any questions I can answer for you? I'll do my best. Yes?
Is there much documentation of people that were prosecuted for being part of the
There is. The question is there much documentation on people being prosecuted? There was a man named John Van Zant. One spelling has it Z-A-N-D-T. And he was taking slaves up from, I believe it was Glendale, and going north on what is now 741. And he had 9 slaves hidden, and he was stopped, and 8 of them were recaptured, but one of them never was recaptured. He was sued, this is 1842, and it went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. The U.S. Marshals in charge of keeping track of that slave was fined $1,000. I'll tell you one little story I forgot to tell you. One of the stories that Jane Finley Wales Nicholson talks about is that in the 1840s, an escaped slave was on trial in Cincinnati to be brought back to slavery. They had to prove at that time that he was the slave they say he was. One of his defense attorneys was future President Rutherford B. Hayes. So he is sitting in court. Now, unlike Perry Mason, the crowd is standing up behind him. There's no seats back there. According to the accounts, he pushes his chair back a little bit further, a little bit further. Then all of a sudden he stands up, someone puts a hat on his head, and he's out the door of the courthouse within less 3 or 4 minutes. He hides for several days in an African-American cemetery in Cincinnati. He is found by a Presbyterian minister, brought into the house, and stays there. A few days later, his name was Lewis, he's dressed up as a nanny, and he's carrying a baby. And they get on the carriage, and they head over to Jane Finley Wales Nicholson's and her husband Valentine Nicholson's home in Harveysburg. And Jane, in her memoirs, writes, "My little daughter was so confused. She saw this awkward young woman go up the stairs, and all of a sudden this young black man came down." And Lewis did eventually make it to Canada, to freedom. So there were trials. But in some cases, people didn't bother with trials. You know, the very well done movie based on a memoir, pre-Civil War, 12 Years a Slave, talks about this black man who was in fact a freeman. He is captured and they say he's a slave. He's an escaped slave. The white guys say he's a slave, he says he's not. Well, the court's not going to believe the black man. And there was another case, a woman also from Nicholson. She had a young, a lady married to a Mr. Benjamin Butterworth, a different one than Thomas's and William's father, had a free man working for them. 2 men came up, captured him, and were going to take him to Kentucky to sell him. Once again, who are you going to believe, this guy or us? Her cousin rode to Lebanon, got the sheriff, and the sheriff stopped them before they could take him to Kentucky to sell him. So there were court cases, you had to prove your case, and for the most part, the word of the black man was taken over the word of the white man was taken over the word of the black man. Yes, sir. Yeah. Well, you know, Dunleavy, I had always read of his stance when he helped write Ohio's first Constitution. And one of the things he wanted in that Constitution is that all free men are citizens, including black men. And he was voted down on them. Up until I read the letter from 1907 to the Western Star from his step-grandson, I never really heard any physical or any documentation of him being involved other than believing in the cause. Well, once again, we're probably being victims of you don't tell, you know. And he died, I think, in 1839, so that's before the Civil War, so you just didn't tell. Yes? Yes. Now that I do not know. The slave owner from North Carolina who had his children by one of his slaves educated at the free black school, did the kids take his name? I don't know for a fact, but I would say yes. That is the case in most circumstances like that. Well, I did not give his last name because from what Jane Nicholson said, she didn't give it either. I think I remember reading it in some other source, but he was from the Petey River Valley, which is in North Carolina, flowing into South Carolina, I believe. But now, as far as whether or not what happened to the children, I don't know. Yes, Lynn. Well, beloved, you know, that's a true story. Yeah, that is the Beloved, the Toni Morrison book. Outside of the supernatural aspects of that, that is a true story.
That's what she said.
Yeah.
She created she won the Nobel Prize, which is very
Yeah.
but she created Beloved from an article she found, a historical article in Cincinnati about slaves and slave catchers.
Yes. Well, she, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the main character's last name was Garvey, I think. And she had two youngsters with him. One was an infant, and one was like 1 or 2 or something of that nature. And I believe, as she was being captured, she killed, I believe, the infant. And the one who was 1 or 2 lived. That is a documented case. She would rather have her child die than be put into slavery. And they actually made an opera about that 10, 15 years ago. Yeah.
Did you try to get across the Ohio from northern Kentucky?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Please remember there is a discount at our gift shop, and hopefully we'll see you here next month. Take care.